Welcome to this edition of BSW Tech Dive. I am John Lynch, Director of Business Development here at BSWUSA.com, Broadcast Supply Worldwide. A very special guest today, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce the Executive Director of the Telos Alliance, Frank Foti. Frank, thanks for joining us here on the show.
Well, John, thank you for the opportunity to spend time together.
You know, you and I, in a sense, go way back. We didn't have a whole lot of contact over the years, but, you know, as long as I've been at BSW, going back to the previous century, and when you were getting started with in your career, there's one thing that I know about folks at your end and about folks at my end that has never changed. The true story here. About 10 minutes before we started recording, I got a text from a longtime customer. Wanted to know, you'll like this, have you got any Omnia 11s in stock? And I gave him my favorite answer. Yes, in stock. Cool. That's the whole thing. People need something now. They want it now. We can ship it now with your help, of course. But my point is on this is you look at the growth of the company, and I always go back to like in the beginning. Did what you're doing now start out with, maybe it was kind of like what they refer to nowadays as a side hustle that got you into the processing world and just build and build from there? How did it all begin?
Well, John, it goes back to my days in radio, honestly. I'm very fortunate to have worked at some pretty well-known radio stations in my career. Probably the two most well-known being WMMS here in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio.
Sure.
But also Z100, WHTZ FM in New York.
Right.
Which, I was at in 1983 when we put it on the air. And that was probably one of the, I will say this, insofar as when I was a worker bee, meaning that I was on, a company's payroll, that was probably the best staff or group I'd ever worked with.
Right.
And, but to answer your question was, when we launched the radio station, obviously the goal was, we wanted to have this, presentation, not only of this, exciting top 40 CHR format, but we wanted it to sound exciting. And so myself having this passion about audio processing, I took it upon myself to come up with whatever it was going to take to create what I felt and the rest of the staff felt was the best sounding station on the air in New York City. And we did do that. And how my going into business came about was later on, I'd been at the station probably about 3 years. And at this point, most of the stations in New York had kind of figured out one way or another what Z100 was doing. And most stations had the same recipe, if you will, Texar Audio Prisms and Optimod and Composite Clipper and, whatever else. And so I started thinking, well, what else can we do? And two things occurred at that time. I started playing around with a product that was known as the Aphex Dominator.
Mm-hmm.
And we had that in the chain. And the reason I was playing with it was I had seen the prototype of it in 1985. And it was very cool. It was designed to be an all-inclusive processor where it had 3-band AGC, 3-band, I think 4-band limiter, final limiter, stereo generator, and all this. And it had dynamic adjustable crossovers. And I remember Steve Church, he was working at WMMS at the time, which was a sister station of Z100. We thought this thing was like the coolest thing since sliced bread. Well, about a year later, what came out was not what we saw at NAB a year prior, but it was this single rack unit, 3-band limiter. And I put it on the air, and it made a bit of a difference. But I remember thinking that if I leaned into it a little bit too much, I could hear it working. It just sounded There was something about it where, in my mind, I remember thinking, it sounds like the attack and release times are the same in all three bands. And at the time, they didn't even have a manual or schematic for it. Well, about the same time, MS Communications came on the scene, and in New York, they launched a station by the name of Hot 103.5. It's now known as Hot 97. And they had a Greg box on the air. That thing, it changed the landscape for a bit. So I took it upon myself to dig in to the Dominator to figure out how it worked, which I did. Eventually, I got a schematic and started modifying things on my own. And that enabled us to take the next step forward to compete with, if not maybe inch past where Hot 90 or the Emma station was. And at this point, you're chief engineer of the number one radio station in New York. You're thinking, life's okay.
Yeah.
Well, people started leaving messages at the radio station like, "Hey, I'm a program director from such and such station in Oklahoma City or Indianapolis or what have you. Man, I would love to know what you're using for audio processing." Well, I wasn't at liberty to say because it was company confidential.
Right.
And so, in observing how my buddy Steve Church had gone into business, starting Telos Systems, doing telephone hybrids, I think in a fit of insanity, I decided to leave day-to-day radio. I was buying Dominators directly, modifying them in my apartment, and reselling them as what I came up with this trade name of the Vigilante, and that's how it all started. Wow. That was back in 1988.
It sounds so much like the history of a lot of others like you that I've met in this industry, and really from the engineering standpoint. And I've had a chance to work with some really terrific, sharp engineers. I don't know that they would say the same about working with me, but because I'm not an engineer, that's not an issue. But the point being is that the guys like you, the guys like the late, great Steve Church and many others that I've come to know, for you folks, good enough is never good enough. I like that.
Well, you know what? To that effect, John, it's a combination of, I think, some drive that was inside of me, and a few people that I think deserve recognition. One of which is Steve Church, another which is my late mentor, Jim Somich, and then my own dad, my father. Mm-hmm. My father, Sam Foti. I'm very fortunate he's still with us at age 93. Wow. And folks, he's still working, not that he has to, but that's his passion. My dad was always something, and he's a mechanical engineer. He'd always be thinking, how can I make something a bit better? Mm-hmm. And I remember like on the weekends when I would visit with him, I would, many people know my hobbies, model railroading. I would bring I'd say, Dad, my model train isn't working right. Not only would he fix it, but he'd say, Frankie, because I'm still Frankie to him, he'd figure out a way to make it work better. Mm-hmm. And so to that effect, it's kind of like by example, I would always look at things and think, well, are we just going to be hanging with the status quo, or is there a way to get something yet a little bit better? And, that's, I guess, been part of my DNA as far back as I can remember. And it's still that way today. I mean, I will share with you guys honestly that while I'm proud of our products, I'm, in the development lab as we speak, thinking, okay, even though people like it and they love it and we're selling these products, what can we do to take, to raise the bar, another step or two? So I guess I'll always be tinkering.
Well, it's like in your case or in your dad's case in his mid-90s, he sounds like one of those guys who he just enjoys what he does, so he's never really worked a day in his life. Well,
that's right, John, and that's his passion, and in many ways that's his hobby. Now his companies have been extremely successful, and my brother now basically runs the company, but we know that if my dad was to stop working, that wouldn't be a good thing. I mean, that there's something to be said about keeping the brain, the gray matter working. We all know that, keep our physical, attributes working. But I will say that, being motivated and driven by what else is there to do, or how can we make something better, I think it's beneficial in many ways. I realize, John, we're talking about things that tie into business, but these things are also very beneficial to those of us with respect to our lives,
I've had several
psychologically and physically.
I've had several medical professionals tell me over the years a great way to hold off or maybe even prevent things like Alzheimer's and dementia is keep working. Keep the
Yep.
brain working.
And doing what you love.
Yes.
I recently was, visit at a doctor's appointment for a checkup, and my doctor was asking me, like, so what are the things that you do? And I was telling him about my, the live steam hobby, well, some people get on me because I'm burning coal and soot and all that kind of stuff and the pollutants. My doctor said, keep doing it, because he knows it's of benefit to me psychologically and
Sure.
physically.
Great. By the way, I do have to share one little contribution to the engineering world that I made about 30 years ago. One of the headset manufacturers came by BSW and they were talking to me about, hey, what can we do to help you sell more of our headsets? And I happen to like theirs a lot, and I was using theirs at the time because I was still sportscasting, and I did something very simple, not technical, but very practical, because there aren't a lot of Frank Fotis sitting around with a soldering gun with nothing to do. I said, factory install the XLR and the 1/4-inch connector on the headsets. They did. We sold them like crazy because it just simplified things, because most of the people buying them or using them are people like me, not really technically inclined. I did make one microphone cable once, and it was best described by Lyndon Baines Johnson when he described his official portrait at the end of his presidency. He said it was the ugliest thing I ever saw. And that was that one mic cable. After that, I said, no, I ain't going to bother with that anymore. But it's not my area of expertise, but I draw on people like you. And, in all of my time here, people like you, Steve Church, I would bother him at like 9 o'clock at night at Telos just to get an explanation of something, because I didn't understand. But he was there working late. You do the same thing because there aren't people around, so you can get more stuff done. And he'd explain it to me. I'd be done in 10 minutes. Say, great. So you folks that do that sort of a thing help us non-technical people a tremendous amount.
Well, John, thank you for saying so. And if anything in the world today, especially in broadcast, it's even more paramount that we, on one hand, make ourselves available, but if we're not available, have resources available, be it, how-to videos or, instruction guides and or stuff within the product to help you understand. And, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, wow, being able to put an Omni 11 in the rack and get it up on the air and make a few simple adjustments, it's very easy. It's very intuitive. And we do that for a reason, because we get it. We understand that while, it may come as a sixth sense to me on various things having to do with signal processing, it's not that way for everybody. And so ease of use is something that is critical, and especially in this day and age. We're fortunate to have a very capable and well-staffed support group that are very good at what they do, many of which came out of day-to-day broadcasting. And they spend time doing a lot. And I'm not just talking about signal processing. I'm talking about, any of the products from the Telos Alliance, just to be able to help people, get things in and going, or if they bumped into some hurdle, how to get past it, and such that, make things as good as possible.
Well, that's the whole point, because the end result is, like you were talking about when you were in New York, it was all about having the best sounding station at the time. And hey, maybe you're there, or maybe you're where I started in radio, in not exactly New York. Try Sholo, Arizona. Great little town. Really learned a lot. There was just a few of us on the staff. But at that point, you're still trying to do everything you can to make it the best that it can be, regardless of budget or anything. And that's one of the beauties of radio that I've always enjoyed, is that, hey, we're always trying to get better.
Yeah, I mean, it's and something to be shared, so that we're not making it appear like it's all about large markets. I can't tell you how many times I'll speak with a customer, especially like at a trade show, and they might be from a smaller market, and they'll say, well, I'm not in New York, or I'm not, and I'll say, you know what, sir, or ma'am, madam, whomever it may be, your facility fulfills, a broadcast channel the same as some radio station in larger markets, and everything is exactly the same. Modulation level is the same. If you're a Class B FM, the power levels are the same. So whatever needs to be done, we want to deliver the same exact experience for people, no matter where they're at. And because all of everyone means the same to us. And I say that sincerely. I mean, I realize that we're in a world today where there's a lot of facilities that are owned under some large corporations, but there's still a lot of local radio stations out there. There's still a lot of broadcasters that are solely owned, and they matter as much to us as any of the others.
Absolutely. And it's always, they're going to be the people like you at that level, or like I worked at a totally different level. All they want to do is, hey, maybe we can't do the business level that you do in New York, but we can sound like we're in New York or wherever. And that's what you've done over the years, and Steve Church has done, and so many other people have done with the 400 different vendors that we represent here at BSW. It's about making a better product, the end result being the sound, wherever you happen to be.
Right.
Had one question, and this, I think, is one thing that Omnia is really on the forefront of, along with others. But the point is it correct to say that we are transitioning away from hardware to all software, maybe down the road at some point?
Well, on the surface,
without giving away any trade secrets.
No. I mean, our company has had a concerted effort for a number of years now, where we provide products known as software as a service or cloud-based products. That said, and by the way, this was a very heated dialogue within the hallowed halls of Telos, where a lot of our efforts were, the planning stages were to say, we're going to put most of our eggs in the software basket. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to have them evenly in the software and the hardware basket. And there's a reason why. It's real easy to get romanced into cool new technology. It is. We all, most of us, we all fall for it. But in the real world of life, you have to follow what's known as the bell curve. And while we've led the charge with software, and I believe just about all of the infrastructure of our products that would facilitate a broadcast facility, we can now offer in software. I also know there are many customers or users or radio stations that have told me, look, I know software is the future. I'm just not ready to go there. And while a box that we would sell is running software, and basically the software that's running in the cloud may even be the exact same code. I get that there are customers and users that where their comfort level is knowing that they can touch a box, that, it may be at the transmitter, it may be at the studio, it may be somewhere, but that's something that we will support. and it'll be that way for a while. What a while is, I don't know. I think that's something that we as a business have to continue to monitor the marketplace. And John, that's something you as well. You're gonna, I'm sure you and the rest of the gang at BSW are getting a sense of like where the world is with respect to software versus hardware. But it's something that they're it is something that we're working on both sides of the fence. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to lean one way or the other, because when it comes down to products, I mean they're going to perform, do the same thing if it's running on a server somewhere in a ISP or in a closet as compared to running in a dedicated box in a transmission rack. I mean, you're going to get the same result.
What you're talking about is something that our company has maintained since its beginnings too, over 50 years ago. And so I'm drawing a parallel. It may not be a good one, but I'm going to anyway. What you're talking about with software versus hardware and keeping it both or something, we also keep something very important in this industry, because we hear from engineers all over the barn that, we could do this technically, we could do this electronically, we could do this here, but you know what? When it gets right down to it, when I get in my truck and this BSW source book is there, I feel a whole lot more comfortable. It's just 200 pages of product full of Telos, Omnia, Axia, etc. That keeps us connected to the past century. And for a lot of people, the way they work, they like having that piece of gear, or in this case, the book, 200 pages every year. So I see what you're talking about as far as maintaining going forward and keeping everybody else comfortable that like to work in the hardware field. Makes perfect sense.
Well, John, I think something else that plays into it is it's kind of generational. You and I came up into the industry back when, before things were pretty much digital. I mean, everything was analog. So yep. Our experience we've literally lived through the transition to early digital and then digital audio with AES. And, now we've got where we can dump signals out onto an IP stream, and where things are running, like here at the office, we have this Forza processor, exactly what machine it's running on here in the office. I have no idea. It's somewhere in this building. I just know that I go to an IP address, bring it up on the computer, and I'm putzing around with it. And, I can route signals to it, and I can take signals from it, be it left, right, or composite. But as somebody who's had experience with the technology, I've been able to ride that wave. I think as, we now see where, generationally, younger folks are coming into the industry, their comfort level is more web-based. They pretty much went through school. I've given presentations at high schools to where kids are not taking notes; they're taking pictures, using their phones. So I think you and I, people like us, we're like right on that fence post of as things may be shifting generationally. I could be wrong. Maybe we come back to it in a few years and revisit the question, and maybe we all have a laugh at my answer. Who knows?
Well, Frank, it has been a joy for me to have this conversation with you. I'm really honored that you had the time to be able to do this and to share some background with you and with others that you've worked with over the years, and how the Telos Alliance has gotten to where it is today. And not only that, not only where it is, where it's also a prominent position in the BSW sourcebook, which will be also, by the way, and where that customer I alluded to at the beginning of the show, who wanted an Omnia 11, and he can get an Omnia 11 right now, that's huge. You don't have to wait. So thank you for all that you do there, and thanks for being a part of BSW Tech Dive. My guest, Frank Foti, the Executive Director of the Telos Alliance. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.